Welcome to another episode of the Golden Hour. I'm Sharif Younes, here with Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to have you on again.
Yeah, Sharif, it's great to be back again, another week.
It is another week down and another week to go. I heard that you were recently explaining OptimalWork to someone, and this person asked you, what is the essence of OptimalWork? Which I think is a great question, and I thought I'd just like to hear your answer to that question.
Well, I experimented with a new way of explaining it, and I said the essence of optimal work is the free energy principle of Karl Friston. So the guy was like, he said, what is that? And I've given this answer, interestingly, to people quite educated in neuroscience, MIT PhDs, and they said, Karl Friston, does anyone understand Karl Friston? So there's even a Twitter account that is for Farrell Quiston or something like that. It's a fake Karl Friston account because he's sometimes very difficult to understand. And I don't pretend to understand all of his computational stuff, but in the broad outline, what it means is the insight that what your brain most likes doing is making predictions. It predicts two things, in a sense, what you are receiving from your environment, your perceptions, and then how you give back to the environment, which is your actions. So your brain is always making these predictions, and it tends to mean that you are caught in this internal model that you have, and that model is the sum of all predictions. So you tend to operate according to a model, and that model then limits what you notice, and it limits your options for what you do. And so it tends to be then that we are built to maintain the status quo and to be subject really to self-fulfilling prophecies. So you will tend to notice what you've always noticed and to do what you've always done. And in that sense, optimal work is how to make things new. How do you break through the roteness? So, the example, like when you sit down to work, if you're not deliberately trying to do it new, you're going to do it the way you always did it. Because doing something new takes deliberation. That's why we want people to set the stage for an hour of work. So then, with deliberation, you can actually surprise yourself. You can be shaping how you're doing things in new ways. And the highest way of shaping yourself is according to ideals. And ideals are inexhaustible. So it's a continual way of, you could say, surprising yourself with new and better outcomes. So the mission of optimal work is really to help people bring their highest ideals into work. But in a sense, that's how you escape the kind of slavery of self-fulfilling prophecies in your life.
Karl Friston describes the brain as having a kind of tendency towards maintaining the status quo or doing what it's always done, and this leads to us being kind of rote in our perceptions or actions. Why does the brain do that? Is that just a bad thing? Is it kind of some bad nature that we're stuck with, or is there some good side to it?
It's to conserve energy.
Okay, so that's what the free energy principle is. That what it's getting at?
Free energy is like entropy. It's the loss of order and energy. So the brain tries to keep things together, and the way it tries to hold things like the whole world in its head is by making a model of it, and then that model allows it to predict and to conserve energy. So then it just tends to be able to focus your attention on what needs to be done. Otherwise, we would be constantly having to think of how do I do this, how do I do that. We need things to actually become rote, and which is to say, to become habitual. So the brain likes, you could say, forming habits. Habits are like that kind of prediction built into us now. And so we have a habitual predicted way of acting. But habits tend to make things more automated and less deliberate. And there's the problem with that is you don't end up experiencing anything as new and less gets deliberately crafted. So if you've been doing the same thing for a long time, then the habits become very powerful. It can be hard to break out of those. An example would be like, imagine that, I don't know, so Sharif, when you go to a restaurant, say a restaurant that you frequent, and you could either try to maximize the surprise of the, where you could have a reward by always choosing something new, or you could try to minimize surprise and go with what's safe. What do you do when you go to a restaurant?
I always order this exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I order
you,
like mostly the same thing, but then one thing different.
Gotcha. So there can be little
Little
changes.
tweaks, yeah.
Yes. We've gotten sushi enough times that I know exactly, right?
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. So it could be that you're feeling adventurous though, and then you're going to be, you know what? And then you're going to actually like, look at the menu and really think about it, and you're going to be deliberate. Well, then with deliberation, you could actually plan out some kind of surprise, and you could be thinking of strategies to maximize rewards. So be thinking, oh, well, what's a new thing they have? But you can only do that if you have the energy available for that. Let's say that you're in some kind of important lunch meeting, like, there's some kind of, like a job interview, or there's some important thing happening, and you just don't have the mental space to deliberate about new rewards. Well, then you're just going to go with what you always do. I think everyone is like that, right? And to some extent, that you're going to go with the safe choice, when you have other demands on your attention. And so that's the idea here, is that the brain is always here between its prediction and its surprise. Surprises open the possibility of new rewards, but the prediction is the safe path, and the brain tends towards the safe path. And it tends then towards preferring the satisfaction of getting what it expected over the variable rewards of experimentation. So it's like, it's okay, just being comfortable with what it knows and doing what it knows.
Now, when you brought up the idea of perception and action, and it seems to me that when I think of rote, I often think of behaviors, like I'm just going to sit down and do this the same old way. But so that's the action part of it. But I thought, the perception part is quite interesting. So I think it would be good to dig into that more in this episode. So I wonder if you could explain that a little bit more.
I think the perception part is that you don't even notice the opportunities to do things differently. So it's like, let's say that you've been working in an office with someone, for some time, maybe years, and all of your conversations, were always, after a while, they're just the same, right? They say some things, you say some things, there's a little exchanging back and forth, and even if you were to say go to a lunch meeting or something, it tends to be the same. And well, that's because you have both formed models of each other, that where you're predicting how they act and they're predicting how you act, and you just get into these locked patterns, right? But then say another person comes around who knows them better, and they start talking, and you realize this is actually a super interesting person, right? And they have all these things that they could talk about. You had just never seen the opportunities for those paths. I think that happens all the time. So you just don't even see the opportunities for like really getting to know the person, because you just had a model of them, and people in themselves, in their inner core, in some ways are always new, right? Especially if they're growing. They're always changing and always new. Well, but your model of the person gets really stuck. And so if people around you don't seem interesting, it's because you're trapped in your own models. And if you run out of things to say with people, it's because you're stuck in your model and you're not really getting to know them in themselves. But I think once you see this is the prediction aspect that Friston is talking about, that you don't even see, all you see is according to your prediction. So you don't notice things that violate it. You don't notice opportunities for new avenues. You're just locked in. So if you're doing some kind of work, you don't even see how you could do it differently. all your attention is naturally pulled to is doing it the same way you've always done it, and just do the next step and do the next step and get it done.
And it seems that we break out of this. For example, in work, I might break out of if I have some specific area that I kind of know I want to grow in, like I want to get better at giving talks, then I can see that there are lots of little opportunities all throughout the day when I'm speaking to someone, at a meal with someone, in meetings. There's always these little opportunities to just work on the way I phrase things or the way I speak. So it seems like when you have a goal that kind of primes you to see the opportunities in all these different situations. But do you or does Karl Friston have a kind of more general solution to how do you actually start to see all the opportunities that are present?
Well, I'm not sure that Friston himself goes into this, in terms of how to put it into practice. 'Cause he's pretty high level, when you in the theory. What I would say is that your conversations reflect your actions; they reflect your being. If So, if you're not becoming new, if you're not doing new things, you're not going to be able to say new things. At a very deep level, like growing. If you are growing, then you're becoming new, and you have new actions. And then you have new things to talk about. But the very fact that when you're discovering new ways of growing, those things become very salient to you, meaning they grab your attention. And if you really make progress in one area, like let's say, take the patience principle, okay, which is if you wait, urges go away. It's a very simple idea. It's super powerful, and it extends in all these different directions. Okay, so you could notice that if you simply, like you have an urge to have a third cookie, and you say, okay, I'm gonna give myself 3 minutes and then uncheck again, and then you come back, yeah, okay, I don't really need it anymore. So just delaying makes it much easier to handle the urges. And then you see other things like, oh, I'm working, and while I got this distraction, and if I just, give myself time to wait and let myself feel the urge, then it's very easy not to give into it. And so on. It starts generalizing. And it becomes more and more salient, and you keep on discovering new ways of doing it. Well, then, when you're talking to people, you start being able to relate it to them too, and show them ways of doing it. So if you're growing, and these new growth principles become really salient, you end up talking about them with others because you see it in their life too. And that's where you get this wonderful thing. And if you actually help someone to grow, then that is super rewarding, and it becomes even more salient. And then you start seeing, and then you notice even more opportunities to grow in it. And so you get this wonderful virtuous cycle, but all is because, that your actions are shaping your being, right? And it's reflected in your conversations. And all the nexus of all of that is how salient or powerfully drawing for your attention something is. To make growth salient leads then to actually having new conversations with people, because you can go deeper now.
Friston's free energy principle, this model, it cuts both ways. That if you're not challenging yourself and you're not doing new things, you'll tend to perceive the same things. So if you're rote in your behavior, you'll be rote in and you'll miss the opportunities. But on the other hand, it's the same thing going on in your brain, that when you are making positive attempts to challenge yourself, then you start to perceive the opportunities. But it's the same
I think that's
underlying
exactly
kind of principle.
right. And as you are becoming new, you're actually and changing. Then you're more open to see others for who they really are, and have a new take on them too. So if you want to change your outlook in everything in life, just start really trying to grow in new ways. And as you start growing in new ways, then you become new, and you're more able to notice the real people around you. As you break out of your model of yourself and the predictions you have for yourself, you're also then getting more free to actually break through the model you had of others.
Well, Kevin, when you mentioned on the topic of conversations and this way we have of having kind of fixed models of other people, made me also think that we do have, in a way, models of ourselves that we try to put forth when we're having conversations with other people. So if if this thing is going on, that we're perceiving other people as kind of models and we're putting forth this model of ourselves, that leads to a kind of superficiality in our conversations, that we're just kind of having the same similar conversations over and over again, but never really getting deeper. So how do we get past this? How do we get past this get through this veneer and get to the real person so we can have a real meaningful conversation?
I think that's a very interesting point. I would actually love to get any comments that people have, on how they go about doing that, because I think that there is a moment in conversation where you somehow like transcend the veneer, so that everyone, and this is, I think, just a way of conserving energy, right? That everyone is just presenting them. We present a certain part of ourselves, and there's like a public persona that when you're going to get a haircut, when you're going to do things, when you're maybe in the office, you just kind of put that persona up, and it just requires, because it's good that others see you in the same way. It's kind of predictable for them. So, and we just get used to, there's like there's a tacit agreement among everyone that, okay, it's just the way we present ourselves. But to become friends with someone, to actually have a bond with someone, you can't bond with the veneer. So I think that's kind of what infatuation is, when two people are trying to bond with their veneers. But you're not really like infatuated with the person in themselves, which is why they say infatuation can't last more than 2 years. So that's perhaps pop psychology, but there's probably some truth to it. That you can fall in love with the veneer, you can idealize people, but that's just the veneer. It's not really the person in themselves. But I think hopefully people have had the experience of really, really good conversations with friends, or conversations that actually made you friends, where you went somehow beyond the veneer. I think that's super interesting to think about, because then you're open to something new, and you treat the person as if you're discovering them for the first time. And you are like getting beyond the model you normally portray of yourself, and you're getting beyond the model you have of them. So there's like a mutual setting aside for a moment of these models as you really meet the other person. I think you could be married to someone for years and actually have lost that experience, and you just operate the business of the family by these veneers, but you're not really deeply connecting. It takes work, but also I think that's kind of what love is about. I think love is not about the veneer. Love is about the actual being of the other, the person in themselves. And in a sense, then, you could say love actually makes everything new. That for your brain, when you really love another person in themselves, you are constantly renewing your model of them, because you're constantly in touch with the reality of them through the bond you have with them. But it doesn't have to be something that only takes place in super transcendent moments. It's just moments of genuine connection. And you could do this with anyone, that you just find a way to genuinely connect with the person in themselves. Maybe one way of doing that is don't try to use them for any purpose, like just to get something done. You just actually take time to make a real connection. Even if it's like a clerk at the store, or you're the clerk in the store and it's the customer coming in. It's just not to be transactional, but to actually try dealing with people as they really are, to actually be mindful of the person in themselves. I think that's how you open up this path to make it new.
Well, Kevin, I think that's a really beautiful note to end on. So if you have any final words, we can end with those.
Maybe just on that topic, that one way of breaking through models is to surprise people in conversations. So with the element of surprise, then they actually are now going to be tuning in to you and yourself. One way of doing that is that there's actually somehow you surprise them with how cheerful you are, or some ideal, or how kind you are, or how thoughtful you are. It's a beautiful thing that when we really strive to live ideals in relationships, or just with any other person, it doesn't have to be a permanent relationship, it's surprising to people. It always strikes them as new. Somehow that ties into love making things new. And the other way of doing is, like, if you have people you're closer to, is let them see that you're growing. and talk about how you're trying to grow. Because then they start being open to you becoming new. And they start being open to you and yourself. If they feel it's been 20 years and you haven't grown in 20 years, then they're not really tuning into you, as easily in yourself. But if you talk about how you're trying to grow, how you're trying to change, then they can actually be more able to open up. So it's good that friends talk about growth together.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing that as you're struggling to grow, as you're trying to make things new, that opens up your conversations and that helps other people do the same and perceive you in a new way and to do new things themselves. So there is really a very deep social dimension to all of this.
Yeah, and when you really bond in that kind of conversation, it is a lot like attaining flow in the golden hour. And so I think the more people actually work on these elements, they're able not to attain those conversations at will, because that requires another person, but it's much more likely to happen. That you're actually tuning into the person in themselves. You're trying to show your real self. If you do that, I think you have the possibility then of these really noble conversations where you can form, even very quickly, very deep bonds.
That's great.
Great.
Okay, well, Kevin, thanks so much, and we'll be
Sure,
back
thank you.
next week.